around the Seattle area.
This meeting is being recorded.
Are part of continued traditional ceremonies that used to happen in areas that we populate to, such as, Lake Washington, or around, the Pier or the Duwamish area where the Longhouse exists, in the marshlands. So I just wanted to acknowledge that the tribal people and the elders from me growing up in Longhouse, we used to hear the elders talk about, we're just thankful. We're thankful for being on this land, for all the food that it gives us, the nutritions, from the water to the trees to the properties of the plants that give us medicines, to the meat that we intake and the land that feeds that meat, that whoever's within this meeting space, the nutrients that you get in your body, that we're thankful for it, because we can't have it without the land that we are presently on. And wherever you are at, when you're logging into this, I encourage you to understand and look at the histories of where you're at, to honor those people too. I also want to give honor and respect to those who came here on forced labor, that we must acknowledge them always, along with our land acknowledgements, because those inequities happen to them as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Noishtamai. All right. So our intentions for the day are to start some stuff. So we want to begin to build relationship. We want to start some important conversation. We want to provide insight into the work that's underway as a part of the CoC and the broader authority, and share some updates. I want to also norm a couple things. One, huge fan of ground rules and ways to engage respectfully. There are going to be breakout spaces today. And I want to invite folks to do a couple things. One, the old and tried and true take space, make space, right? So if you're a person who often speaks first, like me, then invite you to wait a minute, pause, and allow someone else to be the first voice. And if you're often a person who, waits, deliberates, thinks a lot, but might not provide your insight in the meeting, I invite you to take a little bit more space today. The second rule I'm going to ask folks to lift up and live inside of is curiosity, right? So oftentimes I feel conflict can be avoided if we ask people why they think a thing, instead of getting defensive about the thing that they have presented, right? And related to that, the last thing I'm going to, the second to last thing I'm going to ask is for folks to, because we've just asked folks to step forward, to share their thoughts with us, I'm also going to ask folks to, treat things like first drafts, give folks grace in their thinking and in their sharing. Oftentimes, a first draft needs 6 rounds of edits before it's the polished product, right? And we don't have that time today. And so we want to offer people the grace of sharing with us their first drafts without being, without feeling like they're being judged for that. And the last thing I'm going to ask folks to do, in keeping with the fact that this is an organization founded on the principle of racial justice and racial justice and social equity, is to be racially explicit, right? So we've got a lot of conversation today planned through the breakout groups around, power sharing and thinking about, who is most impacted by the experience of homelessness, what communities, et cetera. And I want us to practice and to stretch the muscle of being explicit when we talk about those things, right? So today, right, I'm going to invite you to, if you want to talk about the impact of homelessness on women, right? Then I also invite you to add on to that thought that it impacts women of color more, right, than their white counterparts. So just making sure that as we talk through begin to talk through some of what we need to do as a community, that we're keeping our eyes very firmly on those racial justice and social equity principles. I also invite folks, as you go into your breakout rooms, to renorm these and to recenter these, right? To make sure, again, that you're creating a container, and each breakout group will have, some facilitation, but making sure that, we're creating the right container to have the right conversation in a safe, respectful, but authentic and to some degree challenging way. Okie dokie. This is today's agenda. Beginning in about 2 seconds, we're gonna dive into sort of reintroducing the CoC as it is now constituted as a part of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. From 11 to 12, there's breakouts round 1, sharing power and centering lived experience, building capacity towards equitable procurement and understanding the landscape. From 12 to 12:20, there's an opportunity to reflect and refuel, get some food if that's the time you eat. From 12:30 to 1:30, we will do a second round of breakouts. These are going to be focused more on programs that exist inside the current portfolio and give you an opportunity to begin to reimagine, right, like what those programs might be. Part of our intention with this day is to start the conversation, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, that feeds into our 5-year planning, which is really about, what should these things become, as opposed to, being fixated on what they currently are, right? What should shelter be, right? How should outreach work? These are questions that, certainly authority staff have some analysis and some stances on, but recognize the real importance, right, of building the path forward together. And so we want to make sure that there's a lot of conversation about this, and that, the community is not just suddenly hit with, well, here's your redesigned system and here are the RFPs that go with that, right? That's not our style. And so this is part of, again, the beginning of that conversation. And then from 1:30 to 2, we'll close out the day and talk a little bit about our path forward. Without further ado, let's reintroduce ourselves. So I'll start. I'm Mark. As I mentioned, I use they, them pronouns. And I have the pleasure of serving as the CEO of the King County Regional Homelessness Authority. I want to talk to you a little bit about sort of who I am, if you don't know me, how I came to this role, but then also just what it's been like over the past year to launch this agency, which I think has been, to some degree, appropriately black boxed, but now is a moment that I want to lift the curtain and tell you some things about what life has been like. So briefly, what brings me to this work is my life. Like I tell people, I had a reverse Cinderella story. My family was pretty well off until I was about like 10 or 11. And then we lost most of that. And I spent my teenage years in particular, we were what's called house poor, right? Like had a house, not really anything else. And would often have to hide from like repo men with my mother as they came to like get stuff, right? I'm also, I had some housing instability, like properly like couch surfing in my late teens, early 20s. And I also am a person who lives with a significant set of mental health conditions, one of which is PTSD, because I'm a sexual assault survivor and I've been forcibly institutionalized twice. And I say all this to say that much of what I understand about this work is, both professional and personal, right? I've also spent over 10 years working in the policy space and public health focused on building better government responses for historically marginalized communities, right? I'm a psychiatric anthropologist by training. And also I started doing all this stuff because I wanted to build a world where no one had to experience the things I'd experienced. So that's why I'm here. is I believe that world is possible. I believe that it is unnecessary that people experience homelessness. I believe it is unnecessary that people go through the kinds of suffering that our behavioral health system currently inflicts on folks as part of involuntary commits, right? These are things that I just don't think are necessary. And part of my expertise in this space is the expertise of having lived it. I know what it feels like to be institutionalized and to wind up in a healing space that is focused on my dignity and restoration versus a place that is focused on, you know, being more of a holding pen and like sort of punishing me for having these problems, right? And I want us as a community to commit to the former and understand that building that world, right, where things are centered in healing, centered in dignity, centered in choice, means that we have a long way to go from where we're at. And I just want to be really clear about that. It's important that we be honest that like what we have today is light years-ish from that world. And that's okay, right? Like we, you know, I also am a big believer in just being open and candid about like, you know, what we've made versus what we've inherited. And many of us have stepped into this work at various points in our lives, inheriting a whole bunch of stuff and have focused on trying to make it better. And that's why we're all here, I hope. But that means that we have to be honest and structured and diligent in our continued acknowledgement and continued lifting up that where we are is not where we need to be. And when we talk about centering the voices of those of us with lived expertise, that is not just, right, about an ethical good or a moral thing or something that is like a good progressive move, right? It is also about, again, the fact that there are things I know from having those experiences that allow me to shortcut my way through program design now because I have lived it. That's what centering lived expertise is really about, right? It is about bringing to the fore what we know from having been, as in the Jewish tradition, we call the narrow places, right? And taking that knowledge and putting it into the policy and the program that we craft. And so today, as we talk about sharing power and we get into like some, you know, real clear, I hope, and productive conversation about what that means, I would just invite us to remember the purpose of sharing power is not just to be good progressives. It is to build that better world and to allow those of us who know how to build that better world to put our hands on the tools. All right. So again, setting some intentions, right? It's to tell our story today, to clarify our roles and responsibilities and outline our priorities. So I'm going to dive into this first section, really focused on telling you about the authority, the story of the authority, and where we are, right? Many of you are familiar with this from certain elements, but again, I think there's some work that's happened over the last year or so that's been a little black boxed. Not intentionally, I'll be honest, but just because like, well, you'll see why it's been black boxed. So the authority, as a reminder, is an independent government agency that was created to unify and coordinate the region's response to homelessness. We are not the city, we are not the county, despite, you know, county being in the name. We are our own thing. What we mean when we say, unify and coordinate is that we need to manage the homelessness response across King County and all 39 cities, right? So we are, again, not overly focused on any one jurisdiction. We are trying to understand, map, and build a coherent response for the entire county. And, right, Alexis, who Joe and I were talking about, our sub-regional planning manager, has done an incredible job over her first year at the authority, crafting a path forward to do that work. We have 7 distinct sub-regions. Happy to chat with anyone about that work at a later date. We also understand we need to reimagine the system, right? And that the system needs to be designed around people's needs and what people want, as opposed to what folks have thought people need and want. And in order to get there, there's a lot of co-creation that's necessary. So with community input, equity and justice principles, and better data. And that's been a lot of our focus in the last couple of months, is really getting that better data so that we can have more informed conversations with our community. So what we do, we coordinate all the funding and policy, we administer the contracts that manage that funding. We do the measurement and manage performance, and we collect and analyze the data. Much of this stuff is like still in its protean launch phase right now, but over the course of this year, and as we finalize our 5-year plan, this stuff will become much more solid and where we're headed. And to that end, again, it's really critical that today be understood as the beginning of the conversations in order to do that work in that new way. Our theory of change, which I think is why our team is here, is if we create a customer-centered, or again, centering the voices of those with lived expertise, homeless response system, then we'll be able to meet the needs and eliminate inequities in order to end homelessness for all. And I think that it's for me anyway, one of the reasons I'm here is the end homelessness for all piece is big for me. Like, again, I do not think this is necessary. I don't think this is a job that should exist. I really don't want it to be a job that exists, right? And I want to be really clear that, while I'm not gonna to stand here and tell you, oh, we can do it in 3 years, or we can do it in 7, or whatever. I don't believe in planning like that around dynamic, complex, human-centered problems. But I do think this is the thing that can be done, right? Like, some of how quickly it can be done depends on how much money we have. A conversation we should all be clear about. I just want to be really, really, really straightforward that people who have joined this agency, I talk with our team about this routinely, as a full staff and, various groups. I have never had the privilege of working with a group of folks who are uniformly dedicated to and believe that homelessness is endable. It's like solvable in our lifetimes stuff, not just a problem to be managed, right? And many of us, I will say again, are just desperate to be out of these jobs. I so badly want to be a beekeeper. That's what I want to do. And so I just need this to be over so I can vanish into the woods, and you won't have to hear from me ever again. Again, how we do it. So we're focused on centering the voices of folks with lived expertise, housing first, right? Shelter is not a destination. And then that racial justice and social equity stuff. So let's talk about how we got here. So in 2019, at the end of the year in December, a team that Marshall and I were on together actually called the National Innovation Service helped to craft over the course of about 1.5 years legislation that was signed into law in that December to create the authority. And the goal at the time was for someone to be in this job, my job, by February, March of 2020. And instead we had a global pandemic. And so the authority got wireframed and put on a shelf, right? No one had time to be let's do a new government agency. While we had to full scale redesign, redeploy assets across the system in order to keep people alive. And many of you on this call were involved in that work, right? The restructuring of shelter to be non-congregate, the de-intensifying of congregate spaces, the opening of new spaces, it was, and I see Mary Flowers. Hi, Miss Mary. You did a lot of that work. Thank you. That is why no one sat in this seat until April 26th of 2021, when I'd been confirmed in March. I took I was actually not supposed to start until June, and then I got my first briefing and I was like, cool, I'll start next month. And worked remote for a couple months before I was able to relocate to King County. But that was the road. And what I want to pull the cover back on a little bit, and this is the part that I think has been a little black boxed, is I need to be really clear, because a lot of people have been well, what have you done in the year? And we did a lot, actually. Because we started from nothing, like truly nothing. And that's the part that I actually think I haven't done a good job of explaining to the community. So my very first day, I had no email address. I had no way to take a meeting. I had no way to get in touch with it. I had 0 staff also. I had 3 boards, but no staff. And so my first week was figuring out those basics, right? Like, how am I like signing up for, like getting our web domain so that then I could attach email addresses to it, and using my personal credit card actually to sign up for a Zoom account, so that I could start doing meetings with folks. Because of that, I will also say, like, if you ever have a meeting with me, part of the reason why a lot of those meetings are on Google instead of on Zoom is my Zoom account, like my like one Zoom account for our agency is personally like intractably damaged, apparently, because when we tried to migrate bought this on my personal card over to our Gov account, they like didn't sync. And so now it is deeply unclear sort of like which one is sending calendar invites. And my colleague Naomi has spent actually hours of her life on the phone with the Zoom rep being like, is this ever fixable? And the answer appears to be no. So like, sorry for using Google so much, but that's why. But I really think it's important that folks understand Peter Lynn, our chief program officer, started 3 weeks after that. Ann Martins, our senior director of external affairs and comms, started that same week. I think next was Alexis at employee 4. That would have been in June. And then we got Meg and Helen, Meg, our chief administrative officer, and Helen Howell, our deputy CEO, in August. Along that way, Peter and I had to design and deploy the entire emergency housing voucher program. That was just 2 people. That was just Peter and I being like, what do we think is a good idea? Who should we talk to about whether or not these ideas are good? So I just want to be clear that like much of what we have been doing, we didn't have a way to run payroll. Like so the level of startup that we have been stepping through and out of is as if this was something being run out of your parents' garage, not the government. And so some of what I think some of you have experienced in terms of like, well, where is this? And why is this communication not steady? And how come we're not hearing more routine updates? The time has come for me to like pull back the curtain and be like, the reason is because there was no one to do that stuff. And like, we were really focused on being able to like run a check. Like that's where we have been from an infrastructure perspective. In July of last year, I said to Peter, we need to have a fully implemented grants management system, and turned to Meg and said, we need to have a fully implemented finance system. Those things need to be done by December. Yes, most of the time when you implement those systems, it takes a year. So like that's the level of bananas that it has been over here. And I just want you all to know that, because I think it's important that we be clear that we also know that we haven't been able to keep in touch with people the way that we'd like to. We also know we haven't been able to go to all the meetings we'd like to go to. Like those are things that we are like that criticism is not something that any of the authority staff like shy away from or like feel is like not true. But I want you to know that like part of the reason why I think that criticism is like, yep, absolutely correct, is because this is where we've had to spend our time because of the lack of infrastructure and the lack of basic stuff for when we stepped into our roles. Related to that, right? We've done 56 hires in 13 months. We have about 42 to go. I have never in my life, I've built departments, I have built other agencies. I have never in my life had to hire this many people so rapidly, and I never want to again. This has been like unbelievably terrible. Like, we have been running interview panels literally every week since I started, and they will continue for at least 6 more months filling these positions, right? Which again is just like, that's not normal agency activity. And for those of you who've hired, it's a tremendous pull of time, right? And so lots and lots and lots of staff time goes into managing the hiring panels, making sure that, the pipelines are good, that it's equitable, et cetera, in order to get the right people on board. But again, it's why we are not always the most responsive when people are like, hey, I want to chat about this thing. And I'm lifting this up now simply to say, like, we are totally down with that critique. But what I want to sort of be candid about is I need this community to talk to us less about what we're not doing and more about what you'd like to see. Because there are a lot of things, again, that like we're aware we're not doing. But I also don't think that like people want to just default back to some of the norms for communication that had been in place. So it actually does feel important to use this moment to have a conversation about what is good communication, what is good collaboration, right? When we talk about collaborative communication versus communication that is like just pumping out information and bailing, right? Like, how do we make sure that we are in those kinds of patterns? What do they look like, right? Those are questions that I have for this community. And I think we need to seriously pause and answer them rather than defaulting to, well, we'll do a monthly meeting and have a newsletter, which, like, happy to have a newsletter. We should have a newsletter. I think that's actually, we're going to have a newsletter later this month or early next. But what else, right? In terms of the staff we have, I'm proud of the hiring that we've been able to do. So 86% of our team identifies as non-white, 42% identifies as LGBTQ+, and 50% identify as having lived experience with the homelessness system or behavioral health, criminal legal system, right? The adjacent systems that we know are deeply interconnected with homelessness and often drive those outcomes. I think this is really important because I want to lift up that, centering the voices of lived expertise, right, is not just, oh, we have check-ins with the LEC. Our staff are also the folks, right? Like, we are building an agency that is made of the community we are seeking to serve. And that feels really different to me personally. I've done national work all over this country, and I have never seen this. And I'm really proud to have the opportunity to be part of the inception, the generative moment where we can get it right from a like who's making the decisions perspective. And that feels really powerful to me. So when we talk today about what it means to share power, I also want to lift up that to some degree, that process has begun in how we have constituted this agency and who's having the conversations, in our office, which no one ever really comes to the office, but in our Zooms. Okay. Briefly, we've also been super busy again on just this administrative stuff. So consolidating and migrating 200+ contracts, which we're almost done with, the hiring, the budget development. There was a COVID surge. So like January 1, we got handed the sort of keys to all the things. And suddenly people were like, Dones, what do you want to do with this thing? That was during a severe weather incident and the Omicron surge. And I have never, my beard went significantly whiter in a week. And I never want to have that experience again. We've been doing a lot of public system coordination and cross-sector collaboration that has led to some of our, private sector investments, which are part of our Partnership for Zero effort, which we'll talk about. So diving into our key initiatives. So Partnership for Zero, this is our emergency response to unsheltered homelessness in the downtown core. We're very focused on ending unsheltered homelessness in the downtown core because at our census in the fall, we noted that was the largest concentration of folks experiencing chronic unsheltered homelessness in the county, right? And it was like 800 folks. That's not acceptable. And so we took a strong stance right away to say, well, that is like, we need to build something that is going to assist folks in exiting the experience of chronic homelessness. And let's focus on where folks are currently living unsheltered for a variety of structural reasons that we don't have time to talk about today. that work is built off of our Pure Navigation work, which are system advocate co-directors. I see some of them on the line. So the system advocate team, that team is our PureNAV team. They are going to be really focused on building a program that allows us to have longitudinal supports for folks who are experiencing chronic homelessness. The goal, right, is really that, like, if you're experiencing chronic homelessness, first in the downtown core, but we hope to be able to scale this across the county, like everyone should have a person, right, across all the different segments of the systems that they have to touch. And we know from other systems, behavioral health, et cetera, that when we do that peer work and we make it longitudinal, we see very different outcomes very quickly. By name list, this is a gold standard across all high-performing homelessness systems. We got to know who's out there and who needs us. We are shaping this also as a public-private partnership with Microsoft in order to develop a new platform that we hope will help be we hope will help stabilize the number of different platforms that people are collecting data on. And importantly, we want it to be useful at the level of the client as opposed to just at the level of the administrator, right? Much of how we have approached data has been what is helpful to me as a system administrator instead of what is helpful to a person who is trying to navigate stuff. And so how we are trying to rethink our approach to data is, our Deputy Chief of Community Impact, Owen Kafis, often calls, what we do the data tax, which is we tax people information in order to, and then gate that as how they access services. And the services are not actually better because they gave up that information, right? And so what we really want to do is drive towards a system where the use of data is about providing better service, and that people, when they provide data, get something as a result of having provided that data instead of just I can open a dashboard and see something. Our high acuity work, so very focused on differentiating the system so that it can meet the needs of a whole bunch of folks. One of the things that we noted very early on is that there are a number of folks, most of whom are in our chronic homeless community, but also in some other parts of the population we seek to serve, who are either experiencing significant behavioral health difficulty, either in the substance use dimension or in the psychotic disorder dimension, or are otherwise very medically fragile. And that those folks did not have a dedicated set of resources pointed at them that could help them stabilize as they tried to transit out of the experience of unsheltered homelessness. What we are currently doing is partnering with the county to online beds, hopefully fall, winter, as a result of the SOTO expansion. However, I think that you'll see that this is going to be a dedicated line of work for us, looking to bring on more and more beds of various types with the appropriate staffing supports in order to help people transition. Emergency housing. I think, you saw it in the opening, but, housing first, shelter is not a destination. What we see in the current system is that there is a break between literal, like a structural break between shelter and permanent housing options, meaning that the wait list for those permanent housing options can be quite long. And the option is to then wait in shelter or stay outside. And we know that shelters are not great places for long-term living. And so what we are looking at is something to help bridge that, and frankly, also to think about how emergency housing might come to be a more like a pillar in our response system, so that folks are not even necessarily heading to shelter first, but are going directly into a housing style option that can support them while they are then, waiting for whatever their permanent option is, which could be voucher, could be low income housing, right? There are lots of housing options, not just permanent supportive housing. All right, I believe that is it for your girl. And I am going to turn it over to your Continuum of Care co-chair, Marvin, and my Chief Program Officer, Peter Lynn. Peter and Marvin, show is yours. Tell me when to advance the slides.
Oh, good. Slide.
Very good. Thank you. So just to introduce myself, Peter Lynn. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Chief Program Officer and joined the region from Los Angeles, where I led the sister agency, the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, for 5 years. And so I have a good sense of how such a body might operate and all of the different challenges for a region as complex and large as this one. Marvin?
My name is Marvin Futrell. I serve as one of the co-chairs for the present iteration of the Continuum of Care. Folks that may not know me, I've been an organizer over poor people's rights for over 20 years. So I hope to always bring a perspective of how our systems actually impact folks and where it is not meeting the need. Peter?
Next slide. I think that's just us. You are the pretty pictures. All right. So we wanted to talk through the Continuum of Care. So Continuum of Care is both a regional geography. There are 650 roughly across the United States. Each one has responsibility for addressing homelessness in that given geography. Ours obviously covers the King County area. And the designated roles include, you have to have a Continuum of Care board. Marvin's going to talk about that. That's our advisory committee. But you also need to have specific administrative functions. So the King County Regional Homelessness Authority is just taken on the role as the administrator of our Homeless Management Information System, HMIS. All the continuums are required to capture information on how systems are performing and how the programs are reporting, so they can then provide that to HUD and participate in the national data analysis. We are all required to have a coordinated entry system, and so we have taken on the responsibility for managing coordinated entry. And we are also what's called the collaborative applicant, which means that we put in the application for the annual competition that HUD has. It used to be called the NOFA, which feels a lot more familiar to me. NOFO is the language that they used last year, and I still can't quite wrap my tongue around it. NOFO is going to be a hard sell, but it's the Notice of Funding Opportunity. Used to be the Notice of Funding Availability, and that's our annual competition. We renew the programs that we currently have, and it's certainly those that we've chosen to renew. And then we apply for new funding as it comes out. And we've been very successful as a continuum in competing for new funding. And that's definitely a tradition that we want to continue. So that's been managed by our partners at King County and at the City of Seattle, notably Kate Speltz and Eileen Denham have done a heroic job of putting that application forward every year and getting us new resources. Largely our portfolio there is, these are the Continuum of Care grants, and they're largely in the permanent supportive housing area. Mark?
Okay, well, I guess I'll tackle our CoC structure. With the formation of the Regional Homeless Authority, the governance piece of the authority is done with an implementation board. Consolidated roles from past Continuum of Care activities include Homeless Systems Coordinator, CoC Lead, HMIS Administrator, Coordinated Entry Manager, and the management of city and county funding. The CoC structure within the RHA is that as an advisory committee. The CoC board is defined in the interlocal agreement. The board has absorbed the Consumer Advisory Committee, bringing that lived experience to the table that actually is a decision-making table and has direct impact on several roles.
Right onto East Copeland Road.
So committees, there are several committees that help the Continuum of Care now govern the work, and that includes system performance, which gives oversight for HMIS, directly seated on and oversight for the coordinated entry when some seats are being filled by folks from the Continuum of Care and that also have lived experience in this area. Governance, system redesign, and as we move forward, the PIT. Peter?
Thank you. So the advisory committee is the Continuum of Care board. Obviously, the Continuum of Care itself is all the players who focus in on and work on homelessness together. And the Regional Homelessness Authority is your CoC lead and your collaborative applicant. Next slide. Marvin?
So some of the responsibilities that our board focuses on, number one, is the, oh, slide moved, is having the voice at the table from folks with lived experience. Not necessarily always in an advisory capacity, but also a decision-making one. Continuum of Care governance, HMIS oversight, system performance oversight, coordinated entry governance, and the notice of funding opportunity, priorities, rankings, and approval for our wonderful competitive activity each year. And I actively maintain the code of ethics that protect people. So I think that might be, yeah. Within the ILA, we function as the CoC board. We appoint IB and governing committee and governance members representing lived experience and serve as the advisory committee to the IB, the implementation board. Don't like alphabet soup. Next slide.
And that's back to you, Mark.
Great. So Alex, a lot of what you're saying in the chat, sorry, we should have a separate conversation because I'm using prevalence data and I'm not using the numbers you're using. So feel free to email me and we can chat about it. Okay. Moving into the year ahead, we're gonna make a lot of changes. A lot of changes. But I want to norm that it takes time to change the directions of like complex systems, right? And a colleague of mine, which is where the slide comes from, often says that, you know, systems changing is like turning a freighter around out at sea, right? You can't actually turn it on a dime because when you try to turn it on a dime, it actually rolls over. And so there are lots of things, right, that I think in conversation with our team, you would probably find, again, like broad agreement that like, oh, that thing is broken or that thing is broken. But what we can't do is just dissolve those structures without something to replace them, because then it actually becomes chaos. And so a lot of what we are trying to do through this conversation and through other conversations is design what needs to come next and then create the phased order of implementation in order to bring those new things online without causing significant drops in, you know, who we are supporting, who we are able to support, et cetera. You know, just again, in candor, if we tried to sort of just like flip a switch, it would be chaos. Things would just like go away overnight. We can't do that. So that again is, I think, part of the grace that I'm asking for, from the community, is I think there's a lot of an appropriate eagerness, right, to change how we do a lot of stuff. But what we need to do collectively, not just RHA staff, what we need to do collectively is engineer where we are headed and then think through the phased deployment of those things. And that's the work that, from my perspective, I want to see take shape inside our 5-year plan. And that is part of the conversation that I'd like to start today, certainly in this afternoon's breakout groups that are going to be focused on thinking through the portfolio as it is currently structured and what could come to exist in those spaces instead. So that, I think, is oh yeah. So you all received notice of this, but we're gonna in keeping with this, we're not going to try to rebid the whole system this year. We started looking at that as an option, and we were like, it'll break. So we're gonna cliff things into 2023. And again, over the course of the summer, we're gonna release RFIs, requests for information, and other formal community engagement mechanisms to begin to understand, from the community perspective, et cetera, how should we think about redeveloping portions of the portfolio, and then work with folks to lay out what is the sequence of that rebidding of each portfolio type. And so as of this moment, everything will go into 2023. Any changes in that will come through that community conversation, right? Like if all of a sudden, you see something and it's like, oh, the authority is going to rebid this part of the portfolio in November, right? That actually is not all of a sudden. There would have been a lot of conversation about that. And so you should reach out and ask us, like, hey, where did this come from? And then we can tell you where the conversation was. I think that's it for me this morning. Yeah. Oh, I said most of this already. We're proposing about 23 new project types, 23 new projects as part of our FY23 budget. But they're inside, some of the existing spaces that I outlined, right? So high acuity supports and looking at emergency housing. And now I am done. Oh no, am I doing this? Am I doing the whole budget? I didn't realize I was doing the whole budget. Okay, fine. So our priority incremental changes are adding places for people. So we talked about this at our implementation board meeting. This is not final. So the implementation board reviewed this on Wednesday. Gosh, it's been a long week, and we'll vote on it in the coming weeks. In the interim, we're soliciting feedback from providers, from LEC, from other folks to make sure that we have all the right input. But so we've got $67.9 million in what we call our places for people priority changes. So $5 million for safe parking or vehicle supports, $15 million for daytime community space, $20 million for emergency housing, $20 million for high acuity shelter, $750K for severe weather response countywide, and then $7 million in RHA operating funds, because shockingly, we still don't have enough people to do all the things, which is again part of the reason why you don't hear from us for weird amounts of time. We have additional incremental changes at $18.2 million. 15.4 are focused on provider wages. Our analysis of provider wages is that it's not sustainable. We have 300 vacancies across our 5 largest providers as of this week. From my perspective as your system administrator, that is slow motion collapse, right? Like one of the things that I say very frequently is like the core of this system is like people helping people. And when we, sometimes we dress that up in fancier language and think there's like apps that are doing this work when it's people helping people. And if we don't have the people, then nothing actually happens. So really want to, think about how we can stabilize the pipeline. 1.4 million in a valuing lived expertise, low barrier grant. A lot of agencies are trying to lift up the voices of folks with lived expertise, but need additional resources in order to, form groups, get training, et cetera. We want to be able to support that work across the county. BIPOC agency participation. Similarly, there are a lot of very small for and by agencies that are doing really incredible work, either in the mutual aid space or directly, and are not able to participate in regional planning conversations because they don't have a way, like that costs staff time and like they don't have a thing to bill against for that. So this is a way to allow them to participate in those conversations. And then 795K is TA for small providers to assist them in better accessing and administering government funds, not just RHA funds, but federal, state, et cetera, fund sources, so that they're able to grow and diversify their portfolios. The future funding priorities will be laid out in the 5-year plan, right? That's a requirement in the ILA. This budget the FY23 budget will lay the track for where we think we need to go, but it isn't really our transformational budget, right? Our transformational budgets are going to be outlined through the ILA, or sorry, through the 5-year plan. How we are thinking about that 5-year plan is having 6 years of budgets actually attached to the 5-year plan, so that, like, again, we're really thinking future forward, thinking about how we do this like big freighter shift, like year over year, through the budget as our primary policymaking vehicle. Okay, now I am done. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Cool. Actually, put that back up for just a second, just so that people can see the rooms.
Hang on. Oh, maybe I closed it. Oh, no, I didn't. Here we go.
Cool. So, hey, folks, we are just about to go into our first round of breakouts. There are 4 different sessions, and just as a brief recap, the first is around sharing power and centering customer voice, so how the KCRHA lives into its theory of change. The second is around building capacity. That is with KCRHA's capacity building team around TA and the needs of folks for that team. The third is around equitable procurement, and it will be a bit of a share out and conversation around the ways in which we're moving towards a more equitable procurement process. And then the last is understanding the systems landscape, and that will be the sub-regional planning team that's going to be presenting a landscape analysis of the available services and how they're sort of distributed and spread throughout the county. You will be able to switch between these breakout rooms. So choose the one that's most interesting. If it turns out it's not that interesting, you can flip, sort of like TV. But I will say I've been getting some. Mark, take it away.
All right. Let me share my screen again. Well, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your time. Sorry, working from home and having one monitor and trying to share a screen with a group this large actually is really hard. So give me like 2 seconds. And boop, there we go. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Thank you for your time and contributions today. We are closing out. I appreciate all of you taking time on a Saturday and this much time on a Saturday. It is deeply appreciated, as is everything you do for our community. So I will be brief in just closing us out and talking about where we are headed. As I mentioned before, a lot of where all of this input is going to go is into the scaffolding of our 5-year plan. The 5-year plan is required by our ILA and outlines our core strategies for the authority and how we're going to end homelessness. It builds on prior plans. And I'm going to say something that I hope is not controversial, and with great grace and love. The last thing I am going to do is another 9-year planning process about some shit that we have 45 plans for. I'm just going to be honest. Like, that is not what our community needs. We do not need to do that. We need to act like we have a bunch of plans and figure out what parts of those plans we're affirming, how we're integrating them, and how we're going to move to action and not to more planning. And again, I say that with love, but like that is my orientation, and that is sort of like, that's going to be the vibe. The 5-year plan, as a result, is an implementation document, right? It is not a like theories of practice. It is going to be like, these are the actions we will undertake. These are the results we expect. How we understand internally the 5-year plan, right, is like the NIS report from 2018 forms the foundation with 10 transformative actions outlined in that. We have a regional action framework that was developed over the course of 2019 that builds off that document. And the 5-year plan is sort of the tip of the pyramid, tip of the spear, that'll sit building off of those as our implementation document. How we look at this, right, and how we think about information sort of flowing is the NIS report, the regional action framework, or the RAF, the work from the Understanding Unsheltered Homelessness Project, sub-regional engagement, community workshops that'll happen over the course of the summer. That's going to give us goals and priorities that are going to feed into the 5-year plan. In addition to sub-regional activities, a 6-year budget, there's going to be some gaps analysis work, and that'll give us system priorities, right? The 5-year plan itself will give us system priorities, metrics, guidelines that will then flow into future contracts as the ultimate vehicle, right, that we as the authority use to disperse funding and sort of drive the policy direction. The components of that 5-year plan as outlined via the ILA, goals, actions, metrics, sub-regional activities, procurement process, contractual terms and conditions, frameworks for data collection, frameworks for continuous improvement, and that 6-year budget. So you can see just in that list, like these are tactical things, not, again, theories of practice. Here's, again, as I just said, this is not another like, let's do a plan. This is our progress document, right? Like, what are we measuring change against? And it'll be a living document that is publicly facing. What I also want to make sure that we as a community don't do is set ourselves up to be held accountable for a bunch of action that like we actually can't do, right? Like, so previous planning documents, I think, have been like, well, if this amount of housing is produced, then this will be what happens. And like, we actually, like, no one on this line controls the amount of housing production we're going to have in our region, right? So like, we actually need to stay focused and tight on what can we control and what elements do we anticipate, being able to drive. And if the situation changes, right? Because there is increased production of affordable housing, because there's something that happens with the housing levy, or yada yada yada, then we can adjust our implementation document, but that is how it will be framed, right, as a living, breathing tracker of progress. So our timeline for production, right, so we're here at the CoC convening over the course of June and July. We'll have surveys and workshops and RFIs and community gatherings. We will synthesize a lot of that information over the course of late July. And then in August, we will really be focused in on building, what that 5-year plan is. It'll be more of a website, more of an interactive thing, again, that is living and public facing than it is like, here is a 90-page PDF. You can look at the NIS report actually from 2018 if you want an example of how I often think about how documents can live and breathe, right? I am not a huge fan of here as a PDF to put on a shelf. I think that the best things we can do in this space are often the things that, again, have access, are available to the general public, are written in a way that the general public can understand, have video, audio, like ways of looping people into what is happening, that are not in the language of technocrats and are not in the language, that we use oftentimes in the policy space, that I think, the general public is like, I don't know what that means, and I am confused, right? We need to make sure that like all of the work that we do demystifies, creates the real public will in order to get the job done. And right, that our constituency, right, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are sleeping outside while we have this conversation, are also able to engage with it, understand it, digest it, provide feedback. That's really important, right? Finally, what do we need to know, right? At this point, what I need to know is, do you want to do this work with us? That's my big question. And I'm going to be really transparent. Like, since I have started this job, what I have observed, and I'm going to name this with grace, right, is that like, there's just a lot of burnout right now. 3 years of a pandemic, ain't nobody got no money. Like, it's a hard time to be asking people to be all in on creating something together. But that is my question, right? And what I also need from you all is to communicate with our team, not just about whether or not you can be in on the process, but how you can be in on the process. Because I'm gonna be real straightforward with you. What I'm not gonna do is play around with, here are all the opportunities to engage, nobody engaged, and then we publish a plan and people are like, you did not engage us. We will fight if you try to do that to me. So I need to understand how to best engage you. You have to tell me that, right? I will provide a number of different options, right? Again, from workshops to feedback to, you can look at a thing and review it, RFIs. There are going to be a lot of different ways to engage, but y'all have to decide what the best way is. And right, like, I am more than open, and our team is more than open to the feedback of more of this, less of that. Totally fine with that, right? But we do need to understand what your engagement level is going to be, what your commitment can be, and how best to engage you. Again, we're building on materials that more than 1,000 people contributed to. We know you are tired of planning, and we want to ensure that this activity and this effort meets our collective need as a community. So what's next? You're going to receive a survey asking how you want to co-design and what your interest is. We're going to build a community engagement process that works for you based on that feedback. And there will be multiple ways to engage, right? It will not be a, here is the one way, and if you don't do that, good luck to you. That is really it on that. In terms of CoC announcements, Peter or Marvin, do you want to make these?
I got stuck on my phone, Mark. But yeah, the NOFO season is coming. I believe we also have seats open on our board. We're looking for folks to step up and help fill those seats and bring a wider viewpoints to the table for our discussions. And please keep your eyes open for workshops that will be coming up. Don't know all the details on the planning. We lean heavily on our good folks over at RHA to share details. Thanks.
If you have any questions about the CoC in particular, please use that email address on this slide. I see a question about how will you receive that survey. Marshall and some other folks on our team will be sending it out to folks who registered for this conversation. And I believe also to our wider network. Marshall, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so for sure, everyone who attended this is going to get a survey. That's not only about how you want to participate in 5-year planning, but we'd also really appreciate your feedback on how this was for you as a sort of half day. I think this was a bit of an experiment for us, so want to make sure that we understand how it was. Additionally, I think it will also be on the site just as a door that people can walk into. So we have multiple ways to reach you, but the idea is that it's also something you can share with folks in your organization should you feel like they should participate in the survey as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Marshall.
And Peter, Kelsey, I don't know did y'all have anything else to add here on the CoC announcements? And if not, then that's fine as well.
Yeah, we definitely want to make sure that folks watch the CoC page and keep us keep in touch on the NoFo process as it works its way forward. You'll be seeing a lot more information as we get further into the cycle.
Thanks, Peter. That's it. Thank you for your time. It has been a long week, and this Saturday is my Friday. So I hope that you all find time for rest, for joy, and find whatever it is you need in over the course of this weekend. If you are able to take time off to refill your cups. A thing that I have been reminded of many times since I took this position is you cannot pour into somebody else's cup unless there is something in yours. So really encourage you all to do what you can to find that space to replenish. I know, again, as I mentioned, that since I've taken this position, I've just seen the burnout up close and personal. And so want to offer that for what it's worth. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Mark, thank you. This is
thank
better
you.
than I expected.
Aw,